Imagine a country sitting on billions of dollars in diamonds and gold, the very resources that power our global economy and sit right inside our jewelry boxes. You'd probably expect a nation like that to be incredibly wealthy, right? Well, today we are diving into an explainer on the Central African Republic. It's a country sitting right at the geographic heart of Africa, and it holds a tragic, almost unbelievable paradox.
The sheer reality of that paradox is really captured in a single devastating number: 188. Out of 188 countries on the Human Development Index, the Central African Republic ranks dead last. It is statistically one of the most impoverished, least educated, and frankly, least stable places on Earth.
And yet, the ground right beneath their feet is an absolute treasure trove. We are talking about vast, incredibly valuable reserves of diamonds, gold, uranium, and timber. It's just a stunning contradiction. I mean, how on earth can a land so incredibly rich be home to a population so deeply impoverished?
To figure that out, we're going to walk through this explainer in 6 parts. The paradox of plenty, shadows of colonial rule, decades of instability, the 2013 crisis, the role of foreign actors, and finally, a devastating humanitarian toll.
Okay, Section 1, the paradox of plenty, a wealthy land and impoverished people. Let's dive in.
The disconnect here is just staggering. Even with all those high-value resources like diamonds and gold, the daily reality for the average citizen is incredibly bleak. We're looking at a life expectancy of barely 50 years and a historic rural illiteracy rate of 99%. The wealth of the nation literally does not reach its people. And to understand why, we really have to look backwards.
Which brings us to Section 2, Shadows of Colonial Rule, the French Influence and Artificial Borders.
If you look at the early days of French equatorial Africa, there's a really glaring gap. Notice that stretch from 1889 to 1927? It took nearly 4 decades for the French to set up any real administration, and when they finally did, the focus was entirely on extracting resources, specifically cotton and minerals. It was absolutely not about building a functional state or, basic infrastructure for the people who actually lived there.
The colonial mandate was never about state building. The historical record puts it pretty bluntly. It was understood purely as the economic exploitation of mineral resources. So, when independence finally rolled around in 1960, the Central African Republic was essentially left as a hollowed-out shell. It had borders on a map, sure, but no organic national unity, no built-in institutions, and a population that had been entirely sidelined for generations.
That leads right into Section 3, Decades of Instability, the post-1960 power vacuum. Instead of finding organic stability, the newly independent country fell into this relentless, brutal cycle of military coups and predatory elites. Take Jean Bedel Bokassa, for instance. This guy actually declared himself emperor and ruled with massive, almost unbelievable extravagance, all financed by foreign backing. It pushed the country right to the edge of total bankruptcy. For decades, power just violently ping-ponged between different political elites.
And the inevitable result of all that? Massive, marginalized populations who were entirely cut off from the political and economic game. These elites, they weren't building schools or hospitals. They were maintaining control through sheer coercion, exclusion, and a really heavy reliance on outside powers. This created an absolute pressure cooker of resentment, particularly out in the deeply neglected northern and eastern regions of the country.
Which exploded in Section 4, the 2013 crisis, Seleka versus Anti-Balaka. Let's look at the 2 main factions that emerged from this chaos. On one side, you had the Seleka. They were a mostly Muslim rebel coalition originating from those marginalized northern and eastern areas, and they actually marched on the capital to overthrow the government. Then, in direct response to the abuses committed by the Seleka, you saw the formation of the Anti-Balaka, which were grassroots, mostly Christian and animist vigilante militias. But here's the crucial thing to understand. This clash wasn't initially about religion. It was a vicious struggle for power and resources that tragically morphed into severe sectarian violence. When you consider the demographic breakdown of the country, roughly 80% Christian and 15% Muslim, you can see how the ruthless actions of a few elites quickly polarized the entire nation along religious lines. It completely shattered communities that had peacefully lived side by side for generations, and it led to this massive displacement of minority populations.
The sources we're pulling from are abundantly clear on this point. It wasn't some ancient ethnic hatred that lit the match. It was decades of state fragility. It was intense competition over those diamonds and timber we talked about earlier. And it was domestic elites literally using exclusion as a political weapon.
Section 5. The role of foreign actors, interventions and interests. You see, the CAR essentially became a giant geopolitical chessboard. France maintained its historical military presence, often just to protect its own state-owned firms. Neighboring Chad got involved for border security, but also faced pretty heavy accusations of backing rebel incursions. South Africa and Uganda stepped in with aid and troops, largely to pursue their own regional influence. And all the while, the UN and the African Union were desperately trying to provide peacekeeping and emergency relief right in the middle of this chaos.
The ultimate tragedy of all this foreign intervention was just how fragmented it was. You had humanitarian agencies trying to save lives, while other external actors prioritized securing mining interests or backing their own political favorites. Because it was so highly fractured, the intervention often completely bypassed local governance. And, ironically, it created a cycle of dependency that actually exacerbated the very instability it was supposed to fix.
Finally, Section 6. A devastating humanitarian toll. Society and culture fractured.
It is estimated that at least 7,000 people were executed in just the short span between March 2013 and January 2014 alone. Let that sink in for a second. The sheer scale of the localized violence and retribution over those 10 months was absolutely staggering.
But the violence didn't just take lives. It completely fractured the rich cultural fabric of the country. Deeply sacred rituals, like traditional Yakoma naming ceremonies meant to protect children, were completely disrupted. Sacred healing sites were totally abandoned. And in the chaos, the environment suffered immensely too. Rampant deforestation and unchecked poaching began seriously threatening endangered wildlife, like the African elephant. The foundation of society was torn apart on literally every level.
And the resulting massive displacement forced over 1 million people to flee their homes entirely. Hundreds of thousands poured across the borders into refugee camps in neighboring Chad and Cameroon. Just try to imagine the logistical nightmare and the immense human despair of 1/5 of an entire country's population being uprooted by conflict.
The source material leaves us with a really profound thought. A state invented in haste. Only the outside mechanics have succeeded. The Central African Republic is, at its core, a state constructed by outsiders for outsiders. It has all the formal trappings of a modern state, a capital, official borders, a constitution, but it was never actually given the foundation it needed to function for its own citizens.
So, I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder. If the very foundation of a nation was drawn up purely for extraction, and its politics have been manipulated by foreign interests for over a century, what does the path to true organic peace actually look like? It's a really challenging question, but one we absolutely must ask. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.